One man would share with us this morning the story of his criminal past. Now, I want to warn you before I share with you his words that this man is the king of the run-on sentence. So, there's not going to be any periods, there's not going to be any commas, there's not going to be anything to slow us down here through this account. He says, one time when I was like 6 years old, I was in Walmart and I was eating a tube of Pringles, and I was eating them while my mom paid, but I forgot to let the guy scan my Pringles, so I walked to the door and an alarm went off, and I just started running because I got scared. And then my mom got scared because I was hiding behind the newspaper things, and the Walmart people called the police because I was missing. And when I heard them show up, I thought I was a criminal, so I left my mom a note on the newspaper that said I went to Mexico to start a new life and not to come looking for me. And then I took off running with my Pringles can, and I ran for like an hour, and then the cops saw me walking down the side of the road, so they pulled over. So I started running again, and then they were using the like car intercom thing, and they told me to stop running. So when I did, I thought they were going to put me in handcuffs and take me to jail. So I was crying, and I slapped the officer in the stomach and tried to run again, but he just held me back. And when he asked me what had happened to me, and I told him, he started crying because he was laughing so hard. And he just gave my mom $2 for the Pringles, and he was still laughing when he left. And that's the time I was a wanted criminal. That story reminds me this morning that when we're tempted to think that everything is in ruins and that our life is over and nothing can come out of this, we might not be able to appreciate the truth that it's not all as dark as we think, that things might yet work out fine because the one that we're trusting in is above the storm. We sometimes don't really know what's going on in our lives and assume that what is a temporary setback in our lives is actually the end for us. In our text last Sunday, we saw Israel trying to drag God into their battle with the Philistines. We saw what a mistake it was, as they were thoroughly defeated. But that defeat didn't have the last word, at least not as far as God was concerned. For our text this morning, we're going to continue taking our messages from 1 Samuel. This morning, we're going to read 1 Samuel chapter 6 for our text. Now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. When the Ashdodites arose early in the morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and they set him in his place again. But when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Therefore, neither priests of Dagon nor all who enter Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this very day. Now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he ravaged them and smote them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territories. And when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? They said, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. And they brought the ark of the God of Israel around. After they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city with great confusion. And he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. And as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, "They have brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us to kill us and our people." They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, so that it will not kill us and our people." For there was a deadly confusion throughout the city. And the hand of God was very heavy there. And the men who did not die were smitten with tumors. And the cry of the city went up to heaven. So we read our text this morning. I want to remind you first of all of this. God's people can be defeated. God's people can be defeated. The events in our text this morning took place immediately after two horrible defeats for Israel. In the first battle, they had lost 4,000 fighting men. And in the second engagement, they lost 30,000 more men. And they lost those who had led Israel spiritually. And they lost the Ark of the Covenant. They hadn't just been bested. They had been stomped into the ground. They had been utterly defeated in those battles. That kind of defeat has been known in every age of God's people. Throughout the centuries, we've seen again and again the people of God defeated on one occasion or another. In the Crusades, the wars between the followers of Christianity and the followers of Islam over who should have possession of the Holy Land, we find one such instance of a great defeat. There's some historic record of a youth movement involving up to 30,000 young men who were gathered from Germany and France, who were led by a boy who claimed to have received a vision of Jesus directing him to take this army of young people to the Holy Land and to reclaim Jerusalem for him and to take back the cross that the enemy had taken from them. And so that's what they did. Details are sketchy about what took place, as with all records back from that age. But from what some have pieced together, it appears that this boy and his followers expected that when they got to the Mediterranean Sea, that the sea would part for them so that they could walk through the sea to Israel and reclaim Jerusalem. Only when they got to the Mediterranean Sea, it did not part for them. And so there was a merchant there who owned many ships, who offered them free passage on his ships for as many as wanted to go. And they took off on those ships, and they were never seen again. It was said that those ships, instead of sailing to the Holy Land, went to North Africa. And these young men who were going to fight this crusade for Christ against the Muslims were themselves sold into slavery to the Muslims. They had been trying to serve God, maybe mistakenly. Maybe they were not the most knowledgeable in what they were doing, but they were trying to serve God, and they were utterly wiped out in that effort. When we come to the book of Revelation at the end of the New Testament, we find there the picture that God has brought before John, the vision that John has of the throne room of God. And there we see the souls of the martyrs underneath the altar calling out to God, "How much longer, O Lord? How much longer?" They're crying out because they have died awful deaths in the service of the Lord, and they're wondering how long it will be before their enemies are made to pay for what they've done to them. So we see even in the Bible there that there are those who attempt to serve God who are altogether destroyed in this world. Those who belong to God today can experience defeat and loss. We send our youth off to college where they're bombarded by atheistic professors, and many of them are lost to the faith in that process. Churches set off with great plans to advance the cause of Christ, and those plans often come to ruin. In our own congregation, we've experienced decline and now face challenges that are very great, through which we are barely able to keep things going at this present time. This is not what we wanted or expected in our work, in our efforts to serve the Lord. But this is where we've come to in this present time. We are not in control of outcomes. We can only do our best prayerfully and carefully in our service for the Lord. But we can't control what comes out of that. Even when those who are confident in their hope in the Lord attempt to do something, they can know defeat in this present world. Sometimes it's because we've chosen wrong. Sometimes it's due to the fact that God's given the freedom of will, free will, to those who oppose him as well as those who follow him, and they are free to do great evil against his people at times. And sometimes God allows us to fail for his greater purpose to be achieved in us, a purpose that we have not yet realized. But failure does come upon God's people oftentimes in this world. Sometimes God's servant is left, like the prophet Jeremiah, at the bottom of the well, lamenting his fate and that of God's people, simply because we're on the right side. Doesn't mean we won't fail. We need to understand that it's not a matter of human strategy or the use of our strength that will win us through. We can assign blame, we can make scapegoats, but the failure is part of being in this world, even for people who have sincere motives and who have carefully and prayerfully planned. Defeat can come on God's people. That leads me to the second point this morning. That means because defeat comes on God's people, sometimes his enemies may think that God is beaten. Sometimes they may think that they've won a victory over God, that God has been defeated. The Philistines had first trembled when they heard the news that the Ark of the Covenant had made its way to the battlefield. They knew of the power of Israel's God. They had heard the reports of what happened to that mighty nation of Egypt, which was the world power in its day, when the God of Israel struck them with plagues and forced them to release the Israelites. They had heard, and some of them had seen directly, how God had conquered through his people the land of Canaan, allowing them to take on fortified cities with great thick walls, and reduce them to rubble as he led them in this very ark. They knew the power of God, and they were afraid of that power. They thought that his presence would mean ruin. But when they had destroyed Israel's army and captured the ark, they thought they had conquered Israel's God as well. That's why they took their war trophy, the Ark of the Covenant, and put it in the presence of their god Dagon in his temple. It was like they were making an offering of the God that they had defeated to their great God, who they gave credit for their victory. So they thought that the God of Israel was defeated, and they made him an offering to their own God. I want to tell you that there's many people today who oppose the church who make that same mistake. Those who are destroying the faith of their students in college classrooms, the liberal politicians who are defeating Christians in their communities and in their businesses, also think that they're defeating God. They will remove God from the hearts and minds of his followers and thus relegate him to the dustbin of history. They will eliminate God by their destruction of God's church. They will establish their brave new world free from the influence of God, and he will take his place with the Greek gods who once had millions of believers but are now remembered only as curiosities of long, long ago. Their temples lie in ruin. No one truly believes in the Greek gods anymore. That's what they think to do with the one true God. They're going to make him to reside only in the pages of history, to be a curiosity of the past. In 1882, German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche declared, "God is dead." He meant by that mankind had entered into a new age of enlightenment, and soon no one would believe any longer in those old myths about God. In this age of reason, we would dispose once and for all of God, and he would no longer be involved in our lives. So those who oppose Christianity and those who oppose Christians today want to make Nietzsche's statement a reality. They want to kill God, and they assume that they can do this by defeating his people. And that brings us to our final point. The other thing I want you to see throughout our text this morning, and that is this: God always triumphs. God is not defeated. God's people have been thoroughly defeated here in this account, but God was not in any way diminished. The Philistines, who thought that he could now be subjected to their god, Dagon, put him before the impressive statue of their god in the temple where they worshiped him. But that statue was cast down onto its face before the Ark of the Covenant. And when they raised it up again and secured it upright again, they came back the next morning and it was down on its face once again, only this time the head and the hands had been severed from the body. Now that's symbolically meaningful. The head was considered the place where their God ruled over them, the place where he reasoned, the place where his power came from. His hands were the mighty works that he performed, the miracles that he would do among them. And so when this statue has his head and its hands severed from it, it's God's statement here that God, Dagon, has no power, has no substance, has no meaning in the presence of the one true God. His broken body on the ground showed that their God, not the one true God, had truly been defeated. God continued to school the Philistines concerning his undefeated powers. They tried to locate the ark in the Philistine cities of Ashdod, and then Gath, and then Ekron. But city after city where they moved this ark, God's power reigned over the people. Wherever they took the ark, the death rate skyrocketed, and people broke out with tumors all over their bodies, and terrible confusion reigned in those communities. No one was able to stand the presence of the God that they thought they had bested. The God they thought they had defeated was working these terrible acts against them. Brothers and sisters, I want to tell you this morning, no matter how much defeat we might taste in this world, our God will reign triumphantly. No matter what disasters come upon us, no matter what setbacks we experience, no matter how many times his church is destroyed, none is greater than our God. None is even his equal. They can throw themselves against him, but they will only be broken in their opposition to him. Eventually, that victory that he wins for himself will be our victory as well. Even though we are defeated in this world from time to time, we will experience his victory. Someday we will be in his presence, and he will wipe away every tear, and we will live in eternal triumph with him.